Every town has its secrets, and the funeral home is where most of them are buried. Behind locked doors, beneath polished coffins and silk drapes, there are stories whispered in corridors and recorded in ledgers no one dares read. Stories of bodies that won't burn, coffins that arrive before their owners are gone, and pathways that rearrange themselves to greet their next guest. Tonight, we open those ledgers. We follow the voices that echo from the other side, calling out names, revealing truths that were meant to stay underground. These aren't just ghost stories, they're reports, evidence, accounts collected from morticians, embalmers, and night shift guards who have seen what death truly looks like when it refuses to be silent. Welcome to Funeral Files. This is Voices from the Other Side. Story 1, The Weight That Wouldn't Settle. My name is Henry Collins, and I've worked the night shift at South Plains Crematory in Lubbock, Texas for almost 15 years. If you've never been inside a crematory, you probably picture it all wrong. People imagine flickering flames licking at metal doors, gothic furnaces glowing like dragon mouths, or maybe some macabre factory where conveyor belts carry bodies into roaring fires. In truth, it's nothing like that. The crematory is clean, sterile, industrial. White tile walls, steel counters, and digital control panels that monitor chamber temperatures down to the exact degree. The machines are called retorts, giant insulated chambers lined with refractory brick that can withstand 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The process is controlled, methodical, and if I'm being honest, comforting in its predictability. Once you work here long enough, you stop seeing bodies and start seeing cases. You focus on numbers, weights, tags, paperwork. Death becomes a logistics problem to solve, a system that doesn't allow for error, which is why case #2274 unsettled me so deeply. It was a Wednesday evening in late March, one of those chilly West Texas nights where the wind sounds like it's pulling secrets through the mesquite trees. The funeral home delivery van rolled in just before 7 p.m. A man named Arthur Whitaker, 92 years old, natural causes. His daughter signed the release papers. She was quiet, polite, the kind of person who's been expecting this call for a long time. She mentioned they'd chosen a simple cherrywood urn, no engraving, please, just plain. I nodded, logged the details, and rolled him back to the prep area. Arthur was small, barely over 100 pounds. Cases like his were routine, low body mass, no pacemaker to remove, no special instructions. By 8 p.m., he was in the chamber. I started the cycle, checked the gauges, and retreated to my desk with a cup of stale gas station coffee. The soft hum of the burners became the night's soundtrack. At 11:30, I raked the chamber, collecting the calcified remains into a cooling pan. Then came the cremulator, a heavy-duty processor that refines bone fragments into fine ash. Nothing about Arthur's case was unusual, right up until I placed the finished remains on the scale. 1 pounds, I frowned at the digital display. For someone as small as Arthur, I expected 4, 5 pounds, maybe 5 at most. I recalibrated the scale, weighed a test weight, even swapped out batteries. The reading stayed the same, 1 pounds of ash. Strange, I muttered. Not unheard of, though. Bone density varies. Some people surprise you. I logged it and sealed the urn, placing it on the stainless steel shelf for pickup. The shelf is always orderly, rows of urns tagged with names and case numbers, waiting for grieving families. Arthur's sat there quietly unassuming, or so I thought. When I came back for my shift the next evening, I always do a quick walkthrough before clocking in. I like to make sure nothing looks out of place, no paperwork left behind, no equipment alarms. Out of habit, I glanced at the shelf. Something about Arthur's urn made me pause. It seemed heavier. I laughed at myself. "You're losing it, Collins," I whispered, but the nagging wouldn't leave. I brought the urn back to the scale. 7 pounds, my stomach tightened. That wasn't possible. I checked the calibration again, reweighed other urns. All were consistent. Only Arthur's had gained weight 0.6 pounds overnight. I opened the urn to check for moisture or packing error. The ash was dry, pale gray, perfectly processed, nothing out of the ordinary. I resealed it and wrote "rechecked weight discrepancy" in the logbook. The next night, curiosity got the better of me. I weighed it again, 2 pounds. By the time Arthur's daughter came to pick up the urn on Saturday, the weight had climbed to 8 pounds. I almost didn't give it to her. I wanted to say, something's wrong. Can we keep him here for more testing? But that's not how this business works. We don't frighten grieving families with superstitions. She was a small woman in her 60s, wearing a denim jacket embroidered with bluebonnets. She held the urn against her chest as if it were a newborn. Daddy hated funerals, she said softly. Said they are for the living, not the dead. Just wanted to be back home with Mama. I nodded politely, but something about her words stuck with me. That night, unable to shake it, I looked up the Whittaker family. Obituaries, property records, old news clippings. What I found was unsettling. Arthur wasn't just a father or husband. He was the patriarch of a sprawling family. A man who'd raised 9 children in a ramshackle farmhouse that still stood just outside town. His life story was full of hardship: a Dust Bowl migrant, Korean War veteran, cotton farmer. The obituaries of his children, nieces, nephews told stories of tragedies: tractor accidents, drownings, car wrecks, prison sentences. Generations of pain seemed to radiate from every article I read. The Whittakers had lived and died in Lubbock County for 100 years, their bloodlines rooted deep into the parched soil. 3 days later, I was working late when I heard the front door chime. Families aren't supposed to come after hours. But there she was, Arthur's daughter, still clutching the cherrywood urn. "Something's wrong," she said. Her voice trembled. "It's heavy, too heavy." She placed it on the counter. I could see her hands shaking. I brought it to the scale. 1 pounds. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, she whispered, "It feels like all of them are in there. Daddy, Mama, my brothers." Her voice cracked. I dreamed they were all holding on to him. None of them want to let go. I tried to smile reassuringly, but the words died in my throat. After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about that urn. I decided to keep it overnight, claiming I needed to double-check the seal. Around midnight, I placed it on the scale again. 4 pounds. I recorded the number, turned away for a moment, then checked again. 7. The change happened in real time, the numbers ticking upward by tenths of a pound like a clock counting seconds. I could hear the faintest creak, like wood under strain. I touched the urn. It was warm. The crematory was silent, but I felt a presence, like the weight wasn't just physical but emotional. The air around me felt thick, heavy in my chest. I've spent my career thinking of death as reduction. We reduce a body to ash, reduce grief to paperwork, reduce life to neat numbers in a ledger. But Arthur Whittaker wasn't reducing, he was gathering. His ashes held more than bone fragments. They held memories, guilt, the invisible threads of family history, trauma passed down like heirlooms. And for some reason, that weight was manifesting physically, growing heavier with every hour. I placed the urn in the refrigerated holding room and locked the door. When I returned an hour later, the steel shelf sagged under its mass. The scale maxed out at 50 pounds before blinking an error code. The next morning, Arthur's daughter came back again, insisting she take him home. I hesitated, but something told me this was not a burden the crematory could contain. She carried the urn with both arms, staggering slightly under its increasing weight. Her pickup truck sat idling in the parking lot. "Daddy wanted to rest on the farm," she said softly. "He built that house with his own hands. Maybe he'll settle there." I watched her drive off, the truck bed sagging as if she'd loaded concrete blocks instead of ashes. That was 6 months ago. I still check the news, obituaries, anything about the Whittakers. The house is abandoned now. Neighbors say the family stopped visiting. A delivery driver swears the windows are all boarded up, but sometimes at night you can see silhouettes moving inside, more people than should live there. We've handled thousands of cases since Arthur's, and none have behaved like his. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls over the flat Texas plains, I imagine that urn sitting in a dusty farmhouse, heavier than stone, dragging generations closer together. Some weights don't fade with time or fire. Some families carry their history so tightly that even death can't pry it loose. And somewhere out there, in that old farmhouse on County Road 8, the floorboards groan under the weight that wouldn't settle. Story 2, The Mirror in Room 3. My name is Alina Hayes, and I've been a funeral director at Hayes & Sons Funeral Home in Boston, Massachusetts for almost 20 years. We're a family business, passed down from my grandfather, then my father, and now me. The building itself is older than all of us, a Victorian townhouse built in 1883, its walls heavy with carved mahogany paneling, creaky staircases, and leaded glass windows that distort sunlight into fractured rainbows. Families say the place feels warm, homey, comforting. That's exactly why we keep it this way. People want dignity for their loved ones, not cold sterility. The house is divided into 4 viewing rooms, A, B, C, and room 3. The numbers and letters are a formality. Staff prefer to call them by their decorative themes: rosewood, blue parlor, willow room, and room 3. Room 3 is different. Everyone in the industry knows some spaces just feel heavier. Room 3 has that weight. It's not because of tragedy or neglect. In fact, it's the most beautiful room in the house. Deep burgundy wallpaper, crystal sconces, and a massive antique mirror hanging over the east wall. An ornate 6-foot-tall piece with a tarnished silver frame carved in intricate vines and cherubs. My grandfather said the mirror was original to the house. "It's been here longer than us," he'd tell me, tapping its frame like it was an heirloom pet. "Don't ever move it." I never asked why. I just followed the rule: the mirror stays. Most nights, funerals are quiet affairs. Boston families are practical, subdued in their grief. Room 3 hosted countless wakes without incident. I would stand at the back, hands clasped, greeting guests and adjusting flowers. The mirror reflected it all: people hugging, crying, kneeling before the casket. Nothing unusual. That changed in February of 2023 during the wake of James O'Malley, a retired dock worker in his 70s. His daughter, Kathleen, was giving a eulogy, her voice trembling as she read from crumpled paper. I remember her glancing over my shoulder mid-sentence, her face going pale. She stammered, lost her place. The murmuring crowd turned to look, their gazes locking on the mirror. I turned too. But all I saw was the reflection of the casket and flowers. Later, Kathleen approached me, her hands shaking. "Did you see him?" she whispered. "See who?" "My dad." Her voice broke. "He was standing next to me in the mirror. He looked so strong. Like when I was a kid, not like this." She gestured toward the casket, where James's thin frame rested in a suit that no longer fit his once broad shoulders. I told her grief can play tricks on us. She nodded, embarrassed, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Over the next month, more families reported strange reflections in room 3. A grandson swore his grandmother was smiling and knitting in the mirror. A widow whispered that her late husband looked decades younger, laughing the way he used to before illness. I began to notice it too, not clearly, not at first, just flickers, slight movement in the reflection that didn't match reality. Sometimes a hand resting still on the casket in real life would stroke the fabric in the mirror. Sometimes eyes would open. I convinced myself it was fatigue. Funeral work is exhausting emotionally and physically. But then came the Carver service. Ellen Carver was 91, a school teacher her whole life. Her wake drew hundreds of former students. The line stretched out the door, people sharing warm stories of Mrs. Carver's kindness, her laugh, her cookies. As the evening wore on, I noticed a cluster of mourners standing silently near the mirror. They weren't looking at the casket, they were watching its reflection. One young woman whispered, "She's smiling at me." I walked over, skeptical, and glanced at the glass. There, sitting upright in the casket's reflection, was Ellen Carver. She wasn't the frail woman lying still before us. She was vibrant, glasses perched on her nose, cardigan draped over her shoulders, eyes twinkling with recognition. I froze. My rational mind scrambled for explanations, lighting tricks, stress, imagination. But then she turned her head in the mirror, not in reality, and looked right at me. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear her, but I could read the words, "Thank you." I stumbled back, heart pounding. After that night, I started paying closer attention. Families were no longer frightened, they were comforted. They'd linger in room 3, watching the mirror instead of the body, whispering things like, "That's the dad I remember," or "She's wearing her favorite dress," even when those clothes weren't on the deceased. I began documenting the phenomenon, Polaroids, phone pictures, anything I could manage when the room was empty. The strangest part, the photos never showed what I saw. The mirror appeared perfectly normal in pictures, just reflecting the lifeless scene before it. But in person, the images were undeniable. The mirror wasn't showing ghosts, it was showing who they had been. Not spirits haunting the living, but snapshots of vitality, love, and joy. My father's voice echoed in my head, "Don't ever move the mirror," but curiosity got the better of me. One morning, after services had ended, I decided to take it down for cleaning. It took 3 of us to unhook it. It was far heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that made your arms ache instantly. We leaned it carefully against the opposite wall. The room felt wrong, empty, like a song had stopped playing. That night, during a small wake, the family kept glancing at the blank wall where the mirror used to hang. "It feels cold in here," someone whispered. When I checked my phone later, I noticed something odd. In every candid photo I'd taken during the wake, faint smears of light appeared in the background, vague silhouettes near the casket. It was as if the memories had nowhere to go. I rehung the mirror the next morning. The warmth returned instantly. Word spread quietly among our regular families. Some even requested room 3, believing the mirror gave them one last moment with their loved ones. We didn't advertise it. This is Boston, not Hollywood. But people knew. One night, I caught a man pressing his palms to the glass, whispering apologies. He stayed for hours, tears streaking his cheeks, until I gently asked him to leave. Another time, a mother brought her toddler son to see his grandmother. The boy giggled, waving at the mirror. "Nana's playing peekaboo," he squealed. She hadn't met him in life. I began to worry. Grief is fragile. This mirror offered comfort, yes, but also temptation. In June of 2023, we hosted the funeral of Detective Charles Hennessy, a decorated Boston police officer killed in the line of duty. Hundreds attended. Bagpipes played outside. The air was thick with ceremony and sorrow. His widow sat closest to the casket, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. I stood in the back, scanning the room when I saw her freeze. Slowly, she turned to the mirror. In it, Charles wasn't lying still in uniform. He was standing, healthy, smiling gently, and gesturing for her to come closer. She rose, trembling, and approached the glass. Tears streamed down her face as she lifted her hand to meet his. The entire room fell silent, watching her press her palm against the reflection. "Charlie," she whispered. Her knees buckled. I rushed forward, catching her just as she collapsed. She was unconscious, her pulse erratic. Paramedics arrived within minutes, wheeling her out on a stretcher. She survived, but she never spoke of what she saw. She also never returned to the funeral home. That night, long after everyone left, I stood alone in room 3. "Who are you?" I whispered to the mirror. For a long moment, nothing. Then the surface rippled, not physically, but perceptibly, like heat waves over asphalt. In the reflection, I saw my own mother, who died a decade ago. She was younger than I'd ever seen her, wearing a yellow sundress from an old family photo. She smiled. "Ellie," she said, her voice clear as a bell, though her lips didn't move. I stumbled back, heart racing. I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The mirror wasn't showing ghosts. It was showing memories so vivid they'd become real. I dug through old records, property deeds, anything about the house. I found a photograph dated 1890, the original owners, the Bellamy family, standing in room 3. The mirror was already there. Behind them, in its reflection, was a woman I didn't recognize, one who wasn't in the photo itself. There were rumors, of course. Spiritualists frequented Boston in the late 1800s, holding seances and believing mirrors could hold souls. Some said the mirror was crafted by a silversmith known for memory glass, designed not to reflect reality, but the imprint of life. Whether or not that's true, I know this: the mirror isn't haunted. It's a window to something deeper, a memory preserved so perfectly it feels alive. We still use room 3. We don't explain the mirror. We just let it do what it does. Families leave comforted, not frightened. But I've noticed something unsettling lately. The mirror has started showing more than just the deceased. During a service last month, I glimpsed a woman standing behind a mourner, her hand resting on his shoulder. She wasn't in the room. When I looked closer, I realized she was a future version of the mourner's mother, older, frailer, wearing a hospice bracelet. It wasn't a memory, it was a preview. Now, whenever I walk into room 3, I avoid looking directly into the mirror. I'm terrified of who I might see standing behind me, smiling gently, waiting. Some reflections show us exactly what we need. Others show us what we're not ready to know. The mirror has never lied. That's what scares me the most. Story 3, The Frozen Chamber. My name is Dennis Kowalski, and I've worked at Aspen Valley Memorial Crematory in Denver, Colorado for over 25 years. People assume this job is grim, that spending your days among the dead must wear down your soul. Maybe it does, but for me, the work is comforting. There's a rhythm to cremation, paperwork, tagging, chamber prep, heat cycles. It's precision, not chaos. In a world where families stumble through grief, where emotions overflow and time blurs, I get to provide something reliable. Closure. Fire never lies. If you treat it with respect, it does its job perfectly every time, or at least it used to. It was a cold morning in late October of 2024 when Eduardo Valdez came through our doors. 79 years old, a retired construction worker, built like a man who'd spent his life hauling bricks and concrete. But diminished now, his shoulders shrunken, his skin pale. His wife, Carmen, signed the paperwork with trembling hands. She kissed his forehead before we took him back, whispering something in Spanish I couldn't quite catch. His intake paperwork was standard. Cause of death, heart failure in his sleep. Weight, 210 pounds, no implants or pacemakers. Requested urn, bronze, simple engraving, nothing unusual. Another case. Another family depending on us to do right by their loved one. I tagged him, logged him, and prepped chamber 2. The crematory has 3 retorts, massive steel chambers, each lined with heat-resistant fire brick. When you start a cycle, natural gas flows through the burners, raising the temperature to 1,800 degrees F. A cremation usually takes 3 to 4 hours, depending on body mass. Afterward, bone fragments are processed into fine ash, placed in the family's chosen urn, and documented in our logs. That morning, everything was textbook. Chamber 2 preheated smoothly, the gas system humming like a well-tuned engine. At 9:10 a.m., I slid Eduardo's body into the chamber, locked the door, and started the cycle. By 10 a.m., I noticed something strange. The digital readout showed the temperature dropping 1,800, 1,600, 1,200. I tapped the gauge. Thinking it was a sensor issue, the drop was too sharp. By 11 a.m., the chamber was barely at 400 degrees F. That's warm enough to bake cookies, not reduce a body to ash. I aborted the cycle, opened the chamber, and expected to see a malfunction, a gas leak, a burner failure, anything. But the equipment was flawless. And Eduardo's body was cold, not room temperature cold, not the chill of refrigeration. He was cold like metal left outside in a Colorado blizzard. My breath fogged in the air as I stood there, staring at his form lying untouched on the steel tray. I ran diagnostics. Gas lines were fine, ventilation perfect, ignitors functioning. Chamber 2 worked flawlessly when empty, so I tried again. On Tuesday, I loaded Eduardo into Chamber 1, preheated. Monitored, double-checked everything. By the time I closed the door, I was sweating in my heavy work jacket. These machines radiate heat like ovens. But the moment the cycle started, the temperature plummeted. 1,800 degrees F1, 200, 800, 400. It was like Eduardo was absorbing the heat faster than the burners could produce it. On Wednesday, I used Chamber 3, same result. I documented everything, chamber temperatures, fuel readings, atmospheric pressure, humidity levels, all perfectly normal. Except for Eduardo. I called Robert, our equipment technician, a man who's been fixing crematory systems for 23 years. He showed up with a rolling toolbox, diagnostic tablet, and a smirk. "Never seen a machine I couldn't fix," he said, patting Chamber 2. I explained the situation. He laughed, assuming I'd misread the gauges. By noon, his confidence was gone. "I don't get it," he muttered, scratching his beard as he reviewed his tablet. All 3 chambers are functioning perfectly. Gas flow, exhaust, ignition, sensors, everything spot on. He ran the burners empty. Each chamber reached 1,800 degrees F in 20 minutes flat. "It's your guy," Robert said finally, lowering his voice, "not the machines." On Friday morning, I decided to stay late and run one final test, instead of preheating the chamber. I placed Eduardo's body inside first, then gradually turned on the burners. The temperature climbed steadily to 600 degrees F. Then the gauges went wild. 700, 500, 800, 300, 400. The chamber door felt ice cold beneath my gloved hand, not cool, but freezing, as if the heat was being sucked out through the steel. I pressed my palm against it. The chill bit into my skin, for the first time in my career. I felt afraid of the dead. That afternoon, Carmen Valdez called. Her voice was gentle, hesitant. "Mr. Kowalski, is there a problem with Eduardo's cremation?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "We're experiencing some technical issues, ma'am, nothing to worry about. We'll make sure your husband receives the same care as anyone else." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "He was always cold, you know. Even in summer, he'd sleep under 2 blankets. I used to tell him he carried winter in his bones." Her words sent a shiver through me. By Monday, I'd tried 6 times to cremate Eduardo, 6 failures. My logbook was filled with precise timestamps and impossible temperature drops. Robert suggested transferring him to another crematory. the machines are fine and it's not fuel or airflow, it's him. Send him somewhere else, Dennis. Wash your hands of it. We arranged a transfer to a larger facility across town. I felt guilty watching the transport team wheel him out. In all my years, I'd never failed a family. 3 weeks later, Carmen called again. Mr. Kowalski, she said, her voice trembling. I received Eduardo's ashes yesterday. But there's something strange. My stomach tightened. Strange how? The urn, it's ice cold. I put it in sunlight for hours, but it won't warm up. It feels like I'm holding a block of ice. I gripped the phone tighter, staring at chamber 2. Even empty, it felt colder than the rest of the crematory. No, ma'am, I said carefully. That's not normal. A week later, Carmen stopped by the crematory to thank me. She carried Eduardo's urn in her arms. Out of curiosity, I asked to hold it. The moment it touched my hands, I flinched. The metal burned with cold. I touched plenty of urns. They're usually room temperature, neutral. This one felt like something excavated from a glacier. She saw my reaction and smiled sadly. He always said he'd never leave me, she whispered. Now he keeps the house cold. Even in July, it's like he's still there. Eduardo's cremation logs are still in my desk drawer. 6 failed attempts, each with identical readings. Starting temperature 1, 800 degrees F. Final temperature, 400 degrees F. I've reviewed them dozens of times looking for an explanation. There isn't one. Since Eduardo, we've processed over 700 cases without issue. The chambers run hot and steady. No unexplained drops, no anomalies, just Eduardo. Last winter, I drove past Carmen's house out of curiosity. It was early evening. Snowflakes danced in the streetlights. Her windows glowed faintly yellow, but something about the scene felt wrong. As I idled across the street, I noticed frost patterns spiderwebbed across the inside of her windows, even though the heater exhaust was running strong. A shadow moved across the curtain, a man's broad silhouette pacing slowly. Carmen lived alone. I drove away, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Cremation is supposed to be final. Fire reduces everything, flesh, bone, memories. It turns a lifetime into a box of fine gray powder, but Eduardo's presence defies that law. He carries winter inside him, a chill that even 800 degrees can't thaw. Some people burn hot anger, passion, regret. Eduardo, it seems, carried the opposite. A lifetime of silence, of cold nights, of something so deep and impenetrable that even fire surrendered. Chamber 2 still runs perfectly, but when I'm alone on the night shift, I swear it feels colder than the others. The metal tray has a thin layer of condensation no matter how warm the room is. Sometimes when I'm cleaning up, I'll see my breath fog in the air. I've thought about sanding down the chamber's interior, replacing the fire brick, but part of me doesn't want to disturb it. Eduardo's presence feels permanent, like the cold belongs there now. I've been in this job too long to scare easily. I've seen tragedy, violence, even murder cases, but nothing unsettles me like the thought of Carmen Valdez sleeping in a warm house with a frozen urn by her bedside. She says it's comforting. He keeps me cool, she laughed once, though her eyes looked hollow. If there's one thing this job has taught me, it's that fire is supposed to tell the truth. It's pure science, combustion, chemistry, reduction. But Eduardo Valdez broke that truth. He carries a winter so deep that even fire bows before it. And when I walk past Chamber 2 late at night, I feel it breathing cold against the steel walls, a reminder that not everything burns. Some things freeze forever. Story 4, The Road That Remembers. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've been a driver for Eternal Rest Transport Services in northern Michigan for 6 years. People think funeral directors do all the heavy lifting in this industry, but drivers like me see the part no one talks about, getting the dead from point A to point B. Hospitals, nursing homes, accident sites, if someone passes away and they're not already in a funeral home. It's my job to pick them up. We drive them to the crematory or the funeral home, sometimes across state lines, sometimes in the dead of night with only the hum of the highway for company. It's solitary work, but I've always liked solitude. The open roads of Michigan calm me. Miles of pine forests, farmlands, and abandoned barns slide past my windshield like a painting on a scroll, or at least they used to. It was late September of 2024 when it started. I just picked up the body of an elderly woman from a nursing home in Traverse City, headed for Greenlawn Cemetery 15 miles east. I'd driven that route 100 times, straight down Highway 12, 25 minutes door to door. but halfway there my GPS chirped, "Turn left in 200 feet." I frowned. The route looked unfamiliar. But sometimes there's construction or a traffic accident that the GPS accounts for, so I followed the instructions. The turn took me onto a narrow gravel road that twisted through dense woods. My van rumbled over potholes, trees crowding closer with every mile. Eventually, I passed a sagging, two-story white farmhouse. Its porch leaned precariously, windows boarded up, no trespassing signs nailed to a fence post. There was something about it, how it stood perfectly centered in a clearing, like the forest had been cut away for it and then grew back around it over decades. 15 minutes later, the road reconnected with Highway 12 and I reached the cemetery on time. The detour added maybe 20 minutes, nothing dramatic. Still, I made a mental note to check for construction updates. There weren't any. Highway 12 had been clear all day. The next week, I got rerouted again. Same route, same destination, same gravel road. I told myself it was just the GPS glitching, but I realized something strange when I tried to ignore it. I meant to stay on Highway 12. I had my hands tight on the steering wheel, ready to blow past the turn, but somehow I didn't. I turned anyway, not consciously, not because I was distracted. It felt like my body followed instructions I hadn't given. The farmhouse was there again, exactly as I remembered it. Peeling white paint, a leaning mailbox, and a front door hanging open by an inch. A rusted weather vane creaked on the roof despite the still air. This time I felt a chill as I passed, like I'd driven through a cold patch of air. By November, it had become routine. Every trip to Green Lawn Cemetery meant the same detour, the same gravel road, the same house. One day I decided to stop. It was mid-afternoon, but the woods were dark enough to feel like dusk. I parked in the overgrown driveway, killed the engine, and stepped out. The silence was absolute, no birds, no rustling leaves. The front door creaked open easily. Inside, the farmhouse looked like a time capsule. Furniture was coated in dust, but still neatly arranged. A stone fireplace dominated the living room. Family photos in black and white frames lined the mantel. A dining table was set for 4, the plates yellowed with age but undisturbed. In the front hallway, I found a guest book on a table. Its leather cover was brittle, the pages lined for visitors to sign. Most entries dated back to the 1950s and 60s. So sorry for your loss, sending prayers. With deepest sympathy, the Johnsons. It was clearly a funeral register book, but this wasn't a funeral home. As I flipped through the pages, my stomach turned cold. There was my signature, not once, 17 times. Dates matched every trip I'd made to Green Lawn Cemetery since the detours began. Each time I'd driven past this house, I had apparently parked, come inside, and signed my name. I had no memory of doing this. The ink on the most recent signature was still fresh. The leaning mailbox out front had a name painted in faded black letters. Mitchell, my last name. That night, I called my aunt, the family historian. She was quiet for a long moment when I described the house. "That sounds like your great-grandmother Margaret's place," she finally said. "She died in 1978. Nobody inherited the farm, so it just sat there." I didn't tell her about the guest book. After that day, I started dreaming about the farmhouse. In the dreams, it wasn't abandoned. The curtains fluttered in a warm breeze, and the smell of wood smoke and bread filled the air. A woman I didn't recognize stood at the window, watching me approach. Every night, the dream progressed. I'd walk further inside, past the living room, through the kitchen, into a hallway lined with family portraits. Many of the faces were familiar from family photo albums. Others weren't, but all of them watched me as I passed. When I woke, my hands smelled faintly of dust and cedar. On my 17th trip to Green Lawn, I decided to test something. I left the GPS off and swore I'd stay on Highway 12 no matter what. But when I reached the familiar intersection, I found myself slowing. My hands loosened on the wheel. My turn signal clicked on by itself. I jerked the wheel straight, heart pounding. The van stalled. It had never stalled in 6 years of driving. I restarted it. The engine roared to life. My hands turned the wheel. I didn't stop them. This time I explored deeper. The hallway led to a small back room that smelled faintly of lilac and mold. A narrow bed was neatly made. On the dresser sat a faded Bible and a framed wedding photo. The bride looked exactly like the woman from my dreams. I recognized her now, Margaret Mitchell, my great-grandmother. On the bed lay a newer guest book, its pages blank except for a single line in fresh black ink. Sarah Mitchell 11/21/2024. I stared at it for a long time. The ink was still wet. That night, I searched online archives for obituaries. Margaret Mitchell's obituary was dated October 30, 1978. She died at home in her sleep. The article mentioned the farm, the funeral service, and a detail that made my blood run cold. The wake had been held in the farmhouse. Before funeral homes became standard in rural Michigan, wakes were often held at home. Families would clean the body, lay it in the front parlor, and neighbors would come pay respects. Guest book was part of that tradition, but the one in the hallway wasn't from 1978. Its pages were brand new. A few weeks later, I made another run to Greenlawn, no body this time, just delivering cremated remains. The GPS didn't reroute me, but I found myself driving the gravel road anyway. The farmhouse looked different. Curtains were open. A soft yellow light glowed from inside. I parked and went in. The air smelled warm, like cinnamon and old books. The front parlor was filled with people, my people. Great-grandparents, uncles, aunts, some I recognized from old photographs, others I'd never met. They all smiled as I entered, as if they'd been expecting me. Margaret sat in a rocking chair near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked exactly like her wedding photo. "Welcome home, Sarah," she said softly. Her voice was clear, warm. I stumbled back. "This isn't real." She tilted her head. "Of course it is. This is the road that remembers. It brings family back to where they belong." I bolted. The voices followed me out, gentle, inviting, but insistent. My van's engine roared as I tore out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silently in the clearing, its windows glowing warmly against the dark woods. By the time I reached the highway, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. The next morning, I found a guest book on my passenger seat. It was identical to the one in the farmhouse. The first line read, Sarah Mitchell 12/03/2024. Beneath it, there was another line. Sarah Mitchell 12/10/2024. That was next Tuesday. I've tried throwing the guest book away. It always reappears on the seat. I've tried taking other routes, but no matter where I'm headed, the GPS finds a way to lead me down that gravel road. I haven't stopped driving. Families still need their loved ones transported. The dead don't wait. But every time I pass the intersection, I feel my hands twitch toward the turn signal. Every time I look in the mirror, I swear I see the faint glow of the farmhouse window. And next Tuesday, I think I'll stop fighting it, because some roads don't just take you somewhere. Some roads bring you home. Story 4, The Pink Solution. My name is Vincent Reyes, and I've been an embalmer for almost 20 years. I work out of Seabreeze Memorial Funeral Home in St. Augustine, Florida, a coastal town where retirees outnumber kids 3-1 and the salty ocean air seeps into every building, even the embalming room. Most people don't like to think about my line of work. I understand. My job is to make death look less dead, to give families a final image of their loved one that won't haunt them. It's a mix of science and art, injecting chemicals, suturing, setting features, applying makeup. In the end, I hand a grieving family a memory they can carry without flinching. In 20 years, I thought I'd seen everything: trauma cases, decompositions, autopsies. I thought nothing could surprise me. But then the fluid started turning pink. Let me explain embalming for those who haven't set foot in a prep room. We use formaldehyde-based arterial fluid, a mixture of formaldehyde, water, and dyes to disinfect and preserve. It restores some color to the skin, firms tissue, slows decomposition. A body is connected to a machine that pumps this solution through the arterial system while blood and fluids are drained. The mixture is always the same, pale amber, sharp smell that makes your eyes water. Consistent results: bodies stiffen. Skin cools to the touch but smooths out. It's clinical, predictable. That's the way I like it. The first time it happened was November 2023. An elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, passed at Riverside Nursing Home, a well-known facility in town. She was 86, natural causes, no trauma, a straightforward case. I set her on the table, connected the embalming machine, and started the injection. Halfway through, I noticed the clear tubing changing color. The fluid wasn't amber anymore, it was turning pink. Not faint pink, but bubblegum pink, like strawberry milk swirling through plastic lines. I froze, cross-contamination, blood mixing with fluid. I flushed the lines, replaced tubing, even opened a new bottle of fluid. Same result, the fluid turned pink inside her body. Her skin warmed slightly as I worked, a faint flush blooming on her cheeks. By the time I finished, Mrs. Patterson looked alive, too alive. I applied cosmetics out of habit, but I didn't need much. Her lips had a natural color I'd never seen post-mortem. She looked like she'd fallen asleep during afternoon tea. When her family came for the viewing, they cried tears of relief. She looked so peaceful, her daughter whispered, like herself. I chalked it up to coincidence. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson arrived, also from Riverside Nursing Home, also natural causes, same thing. The fluid turned pink. His pallor disappeared, replaced with a healthy glow. Within a month, I'd embalmed 5 residents from Riverside. Each case turned the fluid pink. Each body looked eerily lifelike. Their families left our funeral home whispering about miracles. I started documenting everything: batch numbers of fluid, temperature of the prep room, body weight, blood type, medications, no pattern, no contamination, no equipment malfunctions. I called Westfield Chemical Supply, my longtime vendor. A technician named Gary picked up. Formaldehyde doesn't change color, he said flatly. You sure you're not mixing it with cavity fluid? I've been doing this for 2 decades, I snapped. I know what I'm doing. Gary promised to send a chemist to run quality checks. A week later, 2 reps in lab coats showed up carrying testing kits. They swabbed every surface, checked our tanks, and pulled samples from the embalming machine. Results perfectly pure, Gary shrugged. Never seen this before. Maybe you've got a weird batch of bodies. I ordered fluid from a different company. Same reaction. 3rd supplier. Same, every Riverside resident turned the fluid pink. Other bodies embalmed in the same room on the same day reacted normally. At this point, I knew it wasn't my chemicals, it was them. It wasn't just the color change. These bodies didn't feel like bodies. They were warm, their skin had a soft elasticity, a faint sheen of life. I'd reposition their hands and the joints moved easily, almost naturally. And the eyes. Embalmers often glue eyelids shut or use caps to create a natural curve, but these eyes never seemed to sink. They stayed round, bright, almost aware. Once I thought I saw a pupil dilate. I told myself I was imagining it. I started embalming Riverside cases after hours so I could focus without distractions. One night in February, I stayed late working on Mr. Thompson, an 84-year-old man with Alzheimer's. His family wanted an open casket viewing. As the pink fluid coursed through his veins, his face softened. The deep wrinkles smoothed slightly. His lips curved upward faintly. When I stepped back, the room was too quiet. I turned to grab a tool, and when I glanced back, his eyes were open. Not slack, not half-lidded, but open and looking directly at me. I froze. Mr. Thompson, I whispered. His lips twitched, not a spasm, but a deliberate tiny movement. I stumbled back, knocking over a tray of instruments. When I looked again, his eyes were closed. His face was slack. I finished quickly and left the building. My hands shaking so badly I couldn't start my car on the first try. I called Riverside Nursing Home the next day, pretending I was confirming records. Just curious, I said to the nurse manager. Have you noticed anything unusual about your residents lately? Medications, diets, anything? She hesitated. Well, they've all been living longer than expected. Some of our hospice patients stabilized months ago. We joke that they are hanging on. Anything else? I pressed. Families have been saying goodbye over and over again, but people keep waking up. It's sweet, really, like they're not ready to leave. Mr. Thompson's viewing was crowded. His family gathered around, crying softly. His daughter leaned close, stroking his hair. He looks so good, she whispered, like he's just napping. I stayed in the back, watching their faces. More than once, someone glanced at him with confusion, as if they'd seen his chest rise. When the room cleared out, I walked up to the casket. I swear his mouth was turned up in a faint smile. I decided to see Riverside for myself. The building was bright and cheerful, walls painted pastel blue, the scent of lavender and cleaning supplies in the air. The residents I passed in the halls were alert, chatty, smiling. Too alert. An elderly woman in a wheelchair reached out as I passed. Her grip was strong. You'll take care of me, won't you? She said, her eyes locking onto mine. I nodded awkwardly and hurried away. The The county coroner sent over an autopsy report for another Riverside patient, Mrs. Lewis. The report noted abnormally high formaldehyde retention levels. That didn't make sense. Formaldehyde is introduced post-mortem. There should have been none. I highlighted the passage, wrote a note to myself. Bodies already preserved before embalming. It was nearly midnight when I embalmed Mrs. Diaz, a Riverside resident. She was 92, with thinning white hair and soft features. The pink solution flowed through her cheeks flushed with color. As I adjusted her head, her lips parted. "Gracias," she whispered. The word was clear, distinct. I froze, my breath catching. She wasn't breathing. Her chest didn't rise, but her eyes flickered beneath closed lids like someone dreaming. I dropped my instruments and ran. I started refusing Riverside cases, told my boss I was overloaded. The cases kept coming. Riverside was our largest client. We couldn't turn them away, so I worked in silence, never meeting their eyes, finishing quickly. Still, I'd catch glimpses of small movements, a finger twitching, a throat shifting as if to swallow. In April, Dr. Martinez, Riverside's medical director, called me. "Families have been praising our residents' appearance after embalming," he said cheerfully. "They say you're performing miracles." "It's not me," I said quietly. "Something's wrong with them before they even get to me." He laughed. "Wrong? No, Vincent, they're special. They hold on, that's why families love Riverside." His tone made me uneasy. The turning point was Mr. Thompson's burial. After the ceremony, I returned to the prep room to clean up. The casket had been lowered into the ground hours earlier, but there he was lying on my table, same pink cheeks, same faint smile. I ran to the cemetery in a panic. His grave was undisturbed, his casket sealed underground. I came back, the table was empty. I still embalm Riverside residents. I keep my head down, my gloves tight, my tools clean. The pink solution still blooms in the lines, softening their features, making them look alive. Some nights I catch my own reflection in the steel cabinet doors, and I swear I see their faces looking back at me, awake, waiting. Whatever Riverside is doing, whatever keeps their residents lingering, it doesn't end when they die. The pink solution isn't embalming fluid anymore. It's something else, something that preserves not just flesh, but the will to stay. And I think one day I'll find myself on this table, pink fluid coursing through me, eyes flickering open, waiting for family that will never know I never really left. Story 6, The Flowers That Spell Names. My name is Rachel Torres, and for the last 4 years I've worked nights as the security guard at Serenity Gardens Funeral Home on the east side of Phoenix, Arizona. People hear night security at a funeral home and think ghosts, rattling chains, jump scares in the embalming room. It isn't like that. Mostly it's air conditioning, alarm panels, and silence so complete you can hear the building breathe. The complex sits on 5 acres. The main building with offices and prep rooms, a separate crematory, and 3 chapels, A, B, and C, each dressed in dark wood and soft sconces. At night, the desert presses in the saguaro silhouettes, the smell of dust and creosote, freeway hum a mile away until everything beyond the parking lot feels like ocean. My shift runs 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Every 2 hours like clockwork, I walk the same route, front lobby, admin hall, prep corridor, the 3 chapels, back to the loading dock, then across the sidewalk to check the crematory doors. I log it all in a spiral notebook with times, initials, and quick notes like chap B temp fine or east exit relatched. Flowers are the one thing that change every night. They arrive late afternoon from half a dozen local florists, standing sprays on easels, casket blankets, wreaths. Little table arrangements in glass cubes with those white envelope cards tucked into plastic prongs. I learned more than I wanted to about funeral flowers. Oasis foam blocks that hold water, green floral tape, the trick of stripping rose thorns with a damp towel, how lilies drop staining pollen if you don't pluck the anthers. They're designed to hold their shape for days. The room is chilled just enough to keep them crisp. Once the staff sets them, they don't move. That's why I noticed when mine did. It started in February, the time of year Phoenix pretends to be gentle. Cold nights, glassy mornings, the kind of air that makes you forget July exists. I logged my midnight round in Chapel B and paused by a standing spray of white roses and eucalyptus. Something felt off. I couldn't say what. The card read with love, the Rasmussens, and the spray laned left the way it had before, but the rose head seemed to face the aisle. Not the casket. I told myself I'd misremembered. You shouldn't fall in love with symmetry in this job. At 2:04 a.m., I passed the same spray and swore an outer ring of carnations had shifted 2 inches higher, like a breath drawn and held. By 4 a.m., the wreath had rotated on the easel. Not much, just enough that the satin ribbon no longer draped center but slanted like a sash. I straightened it, noted it in the log, chap B wreath askew, and moved on. If you let yourself, you can explain anything. The building settles, the AC kicks on, a stray draft, a florist with a loose hand. The next week, it wasn't just a rotation. Whole segments of arrangements traded sides between rounds, sprays blooming wider, hydrangea heads finding new angles, a palm frond that hadn't been there now fanned like a hand above the card. I took pictures with my phone on each pass, intending to prove I was overtired. When I compared them, the differences were obvious. Not dramatic, but intentional, like someone making small corrections toward a clear idea. The idea arrived on a Wednesday at 3:58 a.m. under the fluorescence of Chapel A. At first, I thought someone had left letters cut from paper on the floor. The casket spray had separated into strokes and curves, rose heads forming arcs, baby's breath dotted like punctuation. It wasn't perfect, florals make messy handwriting, but it was unmistakable. The flowers spelled a name across the front of the dais, the letters looping in cursive, Eliseharper. There was no Elise Harper in the building. The deceased that morning was George Whitcomb, 89, navy cap propped by his folded hands. Families don't decorate for strangers. I stood very still, every nerve like wire. I took a photo. The phone image showed a normal casket spray, glossy leaves, roses hugging tight. No letters, no name. When I lowered the phone, the petal script held, graceful as a signature. I didn't touch it. I finished the round, clicking all my door checks a little too loudly, and returned 20 minutes later. The spray had reassembled into itself, no strokes, no letters, no trace the flowers had moved at all. That morning I searched Elise Harper. Phoenix is big, but not infinite. There are too many ways to learn bad news. I scanned online obituaries, social posts, local crime pages, nothing, no Elise, no Harper. I told myself I'd misread it. Elise could have been Eliseo. Harper could have been Harper's. Reality has ways to slip. A week later, Wednesday again, a woman named Elise Harper appeared in the Arizona Republic obituaries. 68, retired librarian, died at home, unexpectedly but peacefully, as these things say. Her funeral was scheduled at a Catholic church across town, not at Serenity Gardens. You can resist patterns until they count themselves on your fingers. The flowers only spelled names at night. The names never belonged to the person lying in the room, and every name died exactly 1 week later. The next it wrote was Alfredo Jimenez. White carnations for the A, yellow chrysanthemums for the loops. I looked him up out of superstition, then out of duty. No obituary. 7 days later, a traffic accident on the Papago Freeway. He died en route. His viewing took place at a funeral home in Tolleson. Our flowers had said his name like a promise. I started a notebook separate from my rounds log, names, dates, chapel, arrangement type. I wrote source unknown next to the first dozen as if I could footnote fate. On my breaks, I refreshed obituary pages like weather radar. The spelling became bolder, in Chapel C. A spray of stargazer lilies curved into the bright, embarrassing cursive of a teenage diary, Megan Lopez. The lilies stained my sleeve with pollen when I leaned close, MEGAN spelled in pink starbursts I couldn't unsee. 7 days later, high school softball field, sudden collapse, undiagnosed heart defect. I told myself I'd stop reading. I didn't. Sometimes the flowers practiced. The first pass would be clumsy, letters hunched and wrong. 2 hours later, the names smoothed as if a hand with more patience had come along to fix the kerning. By 4 a.m., the script was elegant. Morning staff never saw it. Once the sun rose and day people arrived with coffee and whispers, arrangements looked like arrangements again. I tried showing photos, they saw flowers. When I described what I'd seen, our director, Jim, suggested stress, suggested a few days off. Suggested not saying the flowers are spelling names of people who aren't dead yet to grieving families. I stopped telling anyone. Monsoon season always unsettles the building, wind punching the doors, AC laboring, desert rain drumming the flat roof. One storm night in July, the power flickered at 12:29 a.m. The emergency lights painted the halls the color of an emergency exit sign. when the generator kicked. The chapels woke up dimmer and more theatrical, shadows fat and close. In Chapel B, the flowers had abandoned cursive and tried block letters across the bisected aisle rugs. The name was Dion Carter in white roses pinned into place by toothpicks stolen from sympathy trays. The R hooked clumsily like a child's. The edges of the letters trembled in the AC breeze. Okay, I said aloud, because hearing your own voice keeps you human. Okay, I checked the prep corridor, then came back. The name had moved one rug over, cleaner at the margins, like someone had measured. I wrote it down. I told myself I would not look her up for 7 days. I lasted 3. I found a GoFundMe for a chemo fund. She'd posted a selfie with a scarf tied bright around her head. Her comments were all prayers and hearts. She died on day 7. The flowers didn't spell anything that night. They spelled it the week before, as if the message had been delivered and the messenger had left the room. After that, I stopped searching names early. I waited for the full week and added obituary links in tiny, neat handwriting, punishing myself for being right. You can collect names like seashells and feel nothing until one belongs to your own beach. Tuesday, 2:02 a.m., Chapel C. The flowers were bold, a riot of sunflowers and roses moving like schools of fish into letters I recognized before I finished the doorway. David Torres. I read it twice, 3 times. The S at the end curled like the tail of a lizard in alarm. My neighbor David coached Little League, fixed everyone's porch light for free. Shoveled gravel for the old man 2 houses down. He was 42 and healthy. He left beer on my stoop after I trapped a scorpion in a mason jar and carried it across the street because I couldn't kill it. We share a last name but not blood unless the block counts as family. Maybe it does. I stared at the letters until my eyes watered. I tried to disassemble them, pushed one sunflower back into the casket spray. The petals realigned themselves without my hand. I unplugged the AC because you can blame anything on air. The room grew warm and still. The letters held. I stood there with my hand on the easel, aware of how much could break if I wrenched the whole thing to the floor. I pictured explaining the mess to a morning florist, to a widow, to my manager, to a police officer. I pictured David's daughters at practice, helmets too big, knees dirty, when the lights flickered at 4 a.m. The arrangement reset itself, clean blanket over the casket, no letters, just flowers and the smell of green. I wrote down the date. I wrote no. It looked stupid on paper. I didn't sleep when I got home. At noon, I took a bundt cake to David's house and made up a story about a new lava lamp I couldn't lift. He laughed, came over, installed it in 5 minutes, and asked if I wanted to come watch the game that night. I went. He hit grounders to the kids until the sun burned the horizon orange. At 8:41 p.m., he clutched his chest on the third base line and collapsed. The AED didn't help. The paramedics did everything right. The hospital pronounced him dead at 9:12. Every 7 days, the ledger balances. The desert keeps perfect books. I stopped touching the flowers. I stopped removing lily pollen, stopped straightening ribbons, stopped retucking cards that slid out of their prongs. If something wants to write, who am I to edit? But the building started helping me anyway. The cooler in the prep corridor hummed louder when names were coming that night. The thermometer ticked 2 degrees colder in whichever chapel would host the rioting. If I stood in the lobby and breathed in, I could sense which door the letters would gather behind. It was like recognizing when a monsoon will break, the weight of air, a kind of pressure on the gums. I tried to interfere without touching. I dragged a rolling lectern across the expected aisle. The letters wrapped around it like water around a rock. I dimmed the chapel lights. Exit sign glow was enough for the names to find themselves. I played white noise into the room. The petals shifted to the rhythm and the E on the rug became perfect. I started leaving water in the flower buckets shallow, thinking dehydration would stiffen the stems. The arrangement spelled faster, as if urgency sharpened their penmanship. I refilled the buckets to the brim. The letters appeared slowly but larger, graceful like calligraphy. I was arguing with rain by moving a bowl. After David, I took 1 week off. I told Jim I needed time. On my first night back, the names resumed like I'd returned to a paused show. The building never missed an episode. In September, the flowers wrote a name that didn't make sense, Jonah. No last name, no middle initial, just Jonah in block capitals across the front pew. I checked my watch, my phone, the calendar as if I'd stepped through a door and lost a week. Jonah who? I asked the room. The next night, the flowers offered a surname like a correction, Jonah K. The night after that, Jonah Kell, the last letters aborted at the aisle, space ran out, stroke broke apart, a rose head rolled off and touched my shoe. On day 7, nothing in the obituaries. On day 8, Jonah Keller, age 3, appeared, playground equipment failure. The write-up used a photo of a boy with sun-bleached hair and a popsicle grin. I wrote his full name in the notebook and shut it. My hands smelled like eucalyptus for the rest of the day, even though I'd washed them 4 times. I don't schedule my breaks anymore. I sit in the lobby with the lights low and listen for the building to choose a room. That night in October, the choice felt like stepping into my old bedroom and finding all the furniture an inch to the left. The air in chapel tasted like rain that never arrived. The flowers didn't waste time practicing. They went straight to final draft. Cursive steady and assured, letters tall enough that I had to stand in the aisle to read the whole of it. Rachel Torres. I didn't move. Even breathing felt like a thing I could do wrong. I tried walking to the back of the room and found my hand on the doorframe to keep me up. Okay, I told the air, because bargaining is a language you learn in long nights. Okay. I took out the notebook and wrote my name. 10/18, Chapel A, sunflowers, roses, eucalyptus. I closed the notebook and put it back in my pocket because it felt rude to leave the record open like a mouth. All the ways to not die crowded my head at once. Call my sister, leave the city, don't drive, don't eat, don't sleep. Take a week off and sit in a hotel room under a blanket and let 7 days pass like a storm beyond glass. Then I thought about David's daughters at the funeral, how the coach name on the back of their t-shirts puckered when they cried. I moved the flowers an inch with my forefinger. They moved back. I went to the janitor's closet, took a white sheet, and covered the casket spray the way we cover mirrors in some houses after a death. The sheet settled, slack as a shoulder. In slow inches, the sheet pleated itself into letters. Rachel formed from folds and shadows. The T of Torres stitched itself as the AC cycled on. At 4 a.m., the letters softened, then returned to flowers, all innocence and scent. As if a family had wandered in, they would have seen beauty and thought me dramatic. When my shift ended at 6, I drove to South Mountain and watched the sun climb over a city that pretends it doesn't end when streets do. I thought about 7 as a number that appears whenever stories want to sound like truth. I thought about how flowers tell time without clocks. I went home. I didn't call anyone. I worked the next night. And the next. On day 7, I put the notebook and my wallet and keys by the door. I watered my little cactus and wiped dust off the TV I rarely use. I sat on my couch and waited like I was listening for delivery truck. At 8:47 p.m. down the block, an ambulance siren rose and cut. The sound moved too quickly to be mine. I stayed alive. The next morning, I opened the notebook and dated a blank page. The flowers had given me a wrong week or a warning or a reprieve. I don't know which. Maybe the building keeps time in ways that skip like old vinyl. Maybe I had 7 days and spent them, and then, by sitting absolutely still, bought another 7 from a ledger I don't get to see. The flowers haven't written my name again. Not yet. Some nights I don't look. I do the rounds with my eyes on doorknobs and hinges, on thermostats and red LED dots. Other nights I step into a chapel and let the names introduce themselves. Mrs. Nakamura. Terrence W.A. Garsha P. Singh. I write them in the notebook like weather reports and wait for the week to turn. Sometimes I light a battery candle and set it on the aisle rug beside the neat curve of an S. When the morning staff arrives, arrangements are arrangements, fresh, balanced, symmetrical. We get thank you notes from families who say the flowers were perfect, that the room felt peaceful, that something made saying goodbye easier. No one sees the letters but me. I used to think the flowers were announcing death with cruel efficiency, a calendar made of petals. That felt obscene. But the longer I sit in those rooms, the more I think the flowers are not predicting, they are preparing. They're spelling what love will need to say in a week, practicing until the script is legible, until a daughter or husband or friend can stand at a casket and read their person's name in everything that grows. When monsoon winds shove the doors and grit whispers under the thresholds, the names lift and shift like school kids erasing a chalkboard. When July heat squeezes the cool air flat and the lilies start to brown at the edges, the writing gets small and tight, neat as ledger entries. On cold winter nights, the letters go wide and generous as if whoever writes them has time. I still snap a photo sometimes. The camera shows flowers, the eye shows language, the heart believes either or both, depending on the night. In my log between North Exit Relatched and Chap C Temp Stable, I sometimes write one extra line that isn't for work. The flowers know before we do. The desert keeps perfect books, the building breathes, the lilies stain. And on the rug where families will stand, the arrangements practice their signatures again and again until the day arrives when the names no longer spell themselves in petals because they don't need to. On those days, the chapels are just rooms and the flowers are just flowers. On those nights, I miss the writing. I miss the way the names knew and the way for 7 days I knew too. Story 7, Paperwork from the Dead. My name is Thomas Chen, and I've been a funeral director at Heritage Memorial Services in Portland, Oregon for 11 years. Most people picture my job as embalming bodies or standing stiffly in a black suit at services, but honestly, the bulk of my time is spent on paperwork. There's a shocking amount of bureaucracy tied to death. Intake forms, full legal names, social security numbers, dates of birth. Burial permits and cremation authorizations, state-mandated, notarized, error-free, insurance documents, exact policy numbers, cause of death verification, next of kin signatures, written proof of every decision. A single typo, wrong middle initial, incorrect date can hold up funeral arrangements for days. Families depend on me to get it right. It's my job to make sure every blank is filled, every dotted line signed. That's why. When the paperwork started filling itself out, I knew it wasn't a prank or a mistake. It was something else. It was January of 2024. Margaret Sullivan, 84, passed away peacefully in her sleep at home. Her daughter, Patricia, called the next morning, voice shaking but composed. We scheduled an appointment for Thursday so she'd have time to gather documents. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the funeral home early, planning to prep the file before our meeting. When I opened my office door, a neatly completed intake form sat dead center on my mahogany desk. 2 full pages, every line filled out. Full name, Margaret Ann Sullivan. Birth date, April 19, 1939. Parents, James Sullivan and Alina Grant. Social security number, maiden name, spouse details, all perfect. Her signature at the bottom was identical to the one on her driver's license photocopy Patricia emailed me. I assumed Patricia had dropped by early, but the front door cameras showed no one entering before me. No staff had touched the office overnight. When Patricia arrived Thursday, I thanked her for saving time by filling everything out. She frowned, confused. "I haven't filled anything out yet," she said. I handed her the form. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "That's my mom's handwriting." She traced a finger over the looping M in Margaret. Tears welled in her eyes. "My mom always wrote like this. She used to make me practice cursive like hers. This is her writing." Every detail was correct, even things Patricia didn't know. The form listed Margaret's childhood address in Salem, Oregon. Patricia said she'd never heard of that house. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Margaret filled this out years ago for pre-arrangements. Maybe staff misplaced it. But over the next month, 5 more forms appeared the same way, arriving overnight when my office was locked. Each written in different handwriting, always matching samples from the deceased's ID or letters, containing details family members couldn't have provided. One form for Robert Martinez listed a Purple Heart and service dates from 1942-1946. His son swore Robert had never served. I showed him the paperwork. He called his aunt, who confirmed Robert's secret service in the Pacific Theater. The family found his medals in a dusty box in the basement. Another form for Dorothy Walsh included the names of 2 stillborn siblings no one in her family had known about. Dorothy's elderly cousin later confirmed they'd been buried in unmarked graves decades ago. I started testing it. I'd leave blank intake forms on my desk at night, lock the office, set the security alarm, and review footage the next morning. Sure enough, the next day there would be a completed form, filled out in handwriting that wasn't mine. The cameras showed nothing but an empty hallway outside my office. No one entered. Sometimes I'd find the form perfectly centered on my blotter. Other times there'd be a second page folded neatly under a business card as if someone had left it for me to process. Then the letters started. The back of Elizabeth Reeves's form included a full handwritten apology letter to her estranged daughter. The message was raw, emotional. signed with a flourish that matched letters Elizabeth wrote in the 1990s. When I handed it to her daughter during our consultation, she burst into sobs. "This sounds exactly like Mom," she whispered. "She never apologized while she was alive. This is what she would have said." Their family reunited at her funeral, old arguments dissolved in the presence of a letter no one could explain. Not every case produced a ghostly form. Many families filled out their own paperwork the usual way, trembling hands clutching pens. But certain deaths, ones marked by unfinished business, family rifts, or hidden histories, seemed to trigger the phenomenon. It was as if some people couldn't rest until they'd filled in their own blanks. I started a private folder labeled Auto-Completed. Inside were photocopies of each mysterious document. The handwriting samples matched driver's licenses, old letters, even greeting cards families brought in for memorial displays. I never showed anyone outside the immediate family who would believe me. The most haunting case involved Harold Thompson, a quiet, stoic man in his 90s. His form appeared one morning with neat, blocky handwriting and an astonishing entry: U.S. Navy. 1942-1946. Purple Heart recipient. His son scoffed. "Dad, military, no way, he worked at a factory during the war." I gently suggested they check Harold's basement. They found a small footlocker tucked behind paint cans, inside a box containing a Purple Heart, discharge papers, and photos of a young Harold in uniform. His son's hands shook as he showed me the papers. "He never told us," he whispered. 50 years we lived with him, and he never said a word. That afternoon, I placed Harold's medal inside his casket per the instructions written on his form in his own hand. I wanted answers. One night in April, I camped out in my office. I left a blank intake form for Alina Kim, a woman whose death was scheduled to be processed the next day. I locked every door, set up a motion-activated camera, and stayed awake with coffee and paperwork until nearly 3 a.m. At some point, I must have nodded off. When I woke, my coffee was cold. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner, and on my desk lay a completed form, neat, cursive, elegant, feminine. The details included the name of a younger sister who had died at age 5, a sister her adult children never knew existed. I checked the footage. The camera feed glitched at 3:11 a.m., 22 seconds of static, when the feed returned. The paper was there. In May, the forms became more conversational. One arrived with a note in the margin: "Please tell Michael the letters are in the bottom drawer of my sewing desk." Michael was the deceased son. I passed along the message hesitantly. He later confirmed he found 30 years of letters from his father hidden in that exact drawer. Another form had scrawled, "The will is behind the painting." The family found the will exactly where indicated, saving them weeks of probate confusion. I felt like a middleman between the living and dead, a paper courier for ghosts. In June, a form appeared for a man named Daniel Moore, but no Daniel Moore was scheduled. We had no call, no arrangements, nothing. I thought it was a mistake until the phone rang later that afternoon. A hospital chaplain on the line: "We have a Daniel Moore, passed away unexpectedly this morning. The family hasn't chosen a funeral home yet, but your name was in his papers. They'll be calling you." When the family arrived, I showed them the completed intake form. Daniel's wife gasped. "That's his writing. He filled this out, but how?" In August. The handwriting on a new form was my mother's. She died 5 years ago. The form wasn't for her, it was for a stranger named Caroline Price. But at the bottom, under the signature line, my mother's looping cursive spelled, "Thomas, I'm proud of you." I sat at my desk for an hour staring at that sentence, feeling both comforted and hollowed out. I stopped trying to solve it. The forms appeared and I processed them. Families cried, reconciled, discovered secrets, or quietly folded the papers into their purses to keep forever. One family framed their father's form and hung it in their hallway. Another buried their mother's handwritten instructions with her. I became the custodian of their final communications, the archivist of things unsaid in life but written clearly in death. Last month, I arrived at work to find a blank form fully filled out except for one detail. There was no deceased name. Every other field was filled with my information. Birth date, social security number, my address. The signature line at the bottom bore my own signature, perfect down to the slant of the T in Thomas. The line labeled cause of death was blank. I tucked the form into my auto-completed folder and locked it in my desk drawer. The folder is thick now, over 40 cases in neat chronological order. Every page is a message from someone who shouldn't be able to hold a pen. Every line proof that the administrative side of death is more than just red tape, it's a bridge. I still get goosebumps when I see a new sheet appear on my desk, but I don't fear it anymore, because I think some people understand better than we do that paperwork is final proof of existence. Death certificates reduce lives to names and dates. But these intake forms, written in the hand of the deceased, are something else entirely. They are goodbyes signed in ink, and one night soon, someone will find mine. Story 8, The Calendar That Schedules Death. My name is Lee Barnett, and for 13 years I've run operations at River City Cremation on the south side of Sacramento. If you've never managed a crematory, you probably picture furnaces and ash. What you don't picture is the calendar, the thing that rules our days as surely as heat and fuel. Everything lives in the calendar, which retort chamber runs which case, what time the family viewing starts. When the coroner release arrives, the permit numbers, the courier windows, the urn pickups. A dozen color-coded blocks that must touch without overlapping because grief hates delays. We use an industry platform called Cadenza, cloud-based, HIPAA-compliant, multi-location capable with two-factor login that texts my phone every time I blink too fast. It's boring software, which is what you want when your job is precision between families and fire. I have always loved the calendar. It doesn't cry or blame. It doesn't misunderstand. It just arranges the living and the dead into squares you can finish, which is why I noticed the first square that didn't belong. It was a Tuesday in March, the hour when the office air turns the texture of old paper and everyone speaks softer because the afternoon services are underway. I opened Cadenza to check Chamber 2 capacity and saw a new entry, a green appointment block from 2:33:45 p.m. labeled Chen Robert Chamber 2 pending paperwork. Green is our internal color for scheduled awaiting documents. I hadn't created it, neither had our arranger, Kim. The audit log showed, created by system. Created at 09:41 a.m. PT source, internal. Cadenza doesn't create appointments. It has no autopilot. I deleted the block, wrote a note to support, and went back to balancing the day. By 2:17 p.m., my cell rang. Hillside Funeral Home. We're calling to book cremation for Robert Chen. Cause of death this morning, sudden cardiac. Family hopes we can process today. You see a 2:30 hold on your schedule for him. Can we keep it? The green block was back. Same time, same label. Only this time the pending paperwork tag had flipped to docs received. The death certificate was already attached as a PDF. I told Hillside we could accept the case. After I hung up, I stared at the screen until my reflection appeared in it, 2 inches tall, squinting. Cadenza's support replied 2 hours later, we can't reproduce the behavior, no external rights. No API calls, nothing in the logs but your deletion at 0946 and the system create at 10:03. Are you sure no one else on your team is testing? No one was testing. You don't test in March. Robert Chen's cremation ran at 5:00 p.m. He fit neatly between 2 other cases, as if the day had known it would accommodate him before his heart knew it would stop. I told myself coincidence wears any jacket you put on it. The next Monday, there were 3 green blocks waiting when I logged in at 7:06 a.m. Foster Margaret 9:00 a.m. Chamber 1 pending. Wilson James 3:30 p.m. Chamber 2 pending. Park Linda 7:45 a.m. Chamber 3 pending. I deleted them. At 8:45 a.m. A call, Margaret Foster had died in a rollover on I-80. At 10:12, James Wilson, motorcycle vs truck on Freeport. At 7:36 the next morning, Linda Park, natural causes at home. Each family's funeral home called within an hour of each death. Each asked if we could honor the time that your system showed earlier. I stopped deleting. I began screenshotting. I printed copies because paper feels heavier than pixels. I started a folder I labeled Impossible and filed the days like weather maps. When the blocks appeared, I gently moved other cases around them, the way you cradle a fragile thing and leave space on either side. I noticed the calendar's precision. It wasn't today or tomorrow. It was 2:30, 3:30, 7:45. It gave minutes the way ovens give degrees. I built a list. 03/12/14, 30:15:45, Chen. Robert died 12:07. 03/1509/001015 Foster Margaret, died 0852. 03/1515 3016 45 Wilson James, died 1528. 03/1607 450900 Park Linda, died 0736. The difference between the scheduled start and the death time averaged 9 minutes. Cadenza was better at time than EMS sirens. I escalated with the vendor. They escalated to their platform team. They escalated to their CTO, who assured me the system cannot and does not ingest feeds that could predict mortality. He said if your staff is pre-booking based on expected hospice passings, they should label those as tentative, not confirmed. I said, we are not clairvoyant. They audited our instance, IP addresses, user agents, token histories, API keys. They found nothing but the quiet hum of our own logins, the daily rhythm of a small crematory that does not want magic. The CTO finally said, Lee, sometimes clients think a feature is haunted when it's really a process breakdown. He promised a patch and sent me a Starbucks card. The patch did nothing. The green blocks kept arriving. We are not the only node in grief. Hospitals, hospices, coroners, funeral homes, everyone has software. Most systems don't talk to each other. A few do, quietly. We exchange referrals with 2 funeral homes through Cadenza's handoff module, a thing that was supposed to save us phone calls by letting an arranger click send cremation request, which pops an alert in our queue. The green blocks were not coming from handoffs, yet somehow the other guys saw them. Hillside and Golden Valley both began calling in tones that sounded like apology and relief. We see you've blocked 11:15 for Dorothy. Do you want us to send the docs now or wait? It felt like the calendar had a loudspeaker they were hearing, but I couldn't switch off. I added a column to my list, who called first. It was always the funeral home whose software was integrated with ours. Systems had learned to whisper to each other without humans asking them to. I told myself this was convenience. Then I looked at the times, and the difference between convenience and fate looked like 9 minutes. On a Tuesday in May, a green block arrived at 4:30 p.m. in Chamber 3. Barnett, Lai, 16, 3017, 45, pending paperwork. I stared at it long enough to feel foolish. I check keys and purses compulsively. My car gets maintenance before the light turns on. My cholesterol is smug. Seeing my name there belonged to a world where thunderstorms write letters on a window. I deleted the block. At 10:11 a.m., the next day the block reappeared. I clicked it open. It contained a case number, RC 30-1187. A row of empty fields waiting for upload. Death certificate, authorization, permit. The notes box contained a single character, tilde. I rescheduled it by dragging the block to next month. The calendar let me. I saved. I closed my eyes and exhaled like a person who's convinced herself that control is a physical motion. At 2:06 p.m., the block snapped back to May 21, 4:30 p.m. The audit log recorded. Modified by L. Barnett 10:12 a.m. Modified by System 14:06 p.m. Restore original start. I moved it 1 week. It accepted the move and stayed there until lunch. Then it drifted back to the original like a magnet had found its pole. I learned the limit of the calendar's generosity. I could push 7 days. It would concede 7 and reclaim the 8th. On May 21 at 4:19 p.m. I sat in my car in our parking lot and called my sister. We talked about our mother's birthday and the dumb thing her dog had done and how Sacramento summer comes in through vents even when you lock the doors. At 4:28, a pickup in the right lane clipped a ladder that wasn't tied down and sent it scything across traffic. It missed my bumper by inches. It sparked on pavement, screeched into a stop, and lay there like a thing that had tried and failed to be a sentence. I didn't move until 4:40. When I did, I went inside, washed my face, and opened Cadenza. The block labeled Barnett, Lee was still there. Its status had changed to attempted held. The audit log said 1559 system set status equals prep. 1630 system set status equals attempted. 1643 system set status equals held. Next start equals 05/28/1630. I dragged the block 2 weeks. It slid back to 1. I dragged it 1 day. It allowed it. I learned a second limit, how far and how often. I also learned a third, something would try. After that, I stopped pretending the green blocks were errors. I began working with them the way you work around construction, annoyed, adaptive, grateful for predictability. When a block appeared, I planned staffing. I called our arranger and said, let's leave air at 3:30. I made sure the retort maintenance wasn't scheduled to overlap. I placed the urn we'd likely need on the prep counter, not out of superstition, but because the calendar seemed to care about readiness. I also started arriving 15 minutes early to my own dates. At 4:15, I would stand under the shade of the ash tree by the back door and watch traffic like a person peering at weather, ladders, speeding. The 9-minute miracle of how long a life can be spared by a yellow light. I discovered the fourth limit: neglect invites precision. If I forgot, if I acted as though time were wide and the world forgiving, the attempt sharpened. A truck tire blew on Freeport. A neighbor's dog darted from between cars. A box fell from a shelf in our storage hallway inches from where I'd have been at 4:32 if I'd been careless instead of watchful. I began to resent the attention required to survive. People talk about living in the moment as if it's freedom. There is a version of it that feels like assignment. I called the vendor again and told the truth. The support tech listened until I could hear him stop typing. I'm supposed to ask you to clear your browser cache, he said finally. Ask me something else, I said. He was quiet, then asked, what does your gut say this is? My gut says the calendar isn't predicting, it's booking, like a dispatch board the whole city should have access to, but only I can see. He laughed once in a way that sounded unprofessional and human. Then he said, if you want to try something, create a private calendar in Cadenza, one only you can write to, and add dummy blocks where yours appears. Overlay them. See if your blocks repel the systems, or if the systems overwrite yours. I tried it. On the next Barnett Lee, I placed my own event at 4:30 titled Not Today. I locked it with my admin role. At 3:58, the system's green block slid under mine, occupying the same time like two transparency sheets layered. My event stayed visible, so did the systems. At 4:30, an SUV ran the light on 24th. A cyclist put a foot hard on the ground and shouted a word my mother would have scolded. Nobody died. The status flipped to attempted held. The next start moved to the next Tuesday. Private blocks do not repel fate, they just give you something to hold. By summer, the staff had stopped asking why I left gaps on days that looked full. The green blocks sometimes appeared for people we knew from the neighborhood, a deli owner with a loud laugh, a teacher who bought cookies wholesale from Costco and gave them out like grades. The deli owner died of an aneurysm at his slicer. The teacher died in her garden with dirt on her hands. I began doing quiet kindnesses in advance. If the calendar put a name on a Tuesday, I'd call the flower wholesaler Monday and secure a standing spray at a discount so the family wouldn't have to decide on price in shock. I printed extra copies of our grief resources list. I put bottled water in the family room fridge. I learned the birthdays of the dead when Facebook offered them and taped a sticky note to my monitor, so when a daughter came to sign authorization and saw her mother's face on her phone with balloons around it, I could say, "Happy birthday to your mom," without sounding like a ghoul. If this was dispatch, I couldn't stop the call. The least I could do was send the right crew. In September, a green block appeared with no surname. No pending paperwork, no chamber assignment. It was a full-day hold in pale green ghost color on our skin tone palette. I clicked it. 00002359, system hold. Notes, weather, I don't believe in signs. I walked outside and looked at the sky. Sacramento in September is a bleached sheet hung to dry. The block stayed all day like a cloud that refused to break. We had 2 passings that day, both expected. The block remained vague. At 11:59 p.m., it cleared. The audit read, system, release hold outcome, no action. I didn't add it to the folder. I wrote it on a sticky note and threw the note away. I don't know why that felt like obeying a rule. I have thought about entering every name in Sacramento and dragging them forward 7 days like throwing a blanket over a fire and smothering it. I have thought about booking every chamber with not today from now until a year out. I have thought about logging into the vendor's admin console in the middle of the night and deleting our instance, as if burning the house could starve the ghost. I have not tried any of those things, for reasons that shift depending on whether I slept and how the ladder on the truck in front of me is tied. Mostly it's because the green blocks don't feel like malice. They feel like courtesy, like someone motioning with their hand in traffic after you, now me. Also, every time I hold my own appointment, someone else's block tightens by a minute. I don't know if that's math or guilt, I just know it happens. Right now, as I write this, there's a green block at 4:30 p.m. next Tuesday with my last name in all caps. I moved it 7 days yesterday morning, then again this afternoon because I like the ritual of it, the way pushing time feels like folding a fitted sheet, clumsy, stubborn, occasionally elegant. I will go outside at 4:15 and stand under the ash tree and listen for the sound of a ladder that isn't tied. I will call my sister and ask about her dog. I will not drive toward yellow. At 4:31, something may try. At 4:43, if the log says attempted held, I will breathe and make a note to buy more bottled water for Wednesday's family. If one day the block won't move, if the system refuses my hand, I hope it does it kindly. I hope the calendar gives me an hour to sit on the back steps and feel the warm concrete and look at the stamp in the corner that says River City Cremation, 1987, pressed when the slab was young. I hope the audit reads something soft. People ask if I've told anyone. I have told you. I have told the folder labeled impossible that grows thicker in my bottom drawer, its paper weight like a brick that holds a door open. I have told the vendor who can't see what I see. I have told the ash tree that knows how to move without leaving. The calendar is not a prophet. It is a scheduler. It makes room. It does what I do, find gaps, place burdens, make sure there is heat and a person and a time. It is patient. It does not punish. It simply waits for you to accept or reschedule. Some days I hate it. Some days I'm grateful to know the shape of a week. All days I respect it. I used to think my job was returning what remained. Then I thought it was managing the fire. Now I think it's negotiation with the living, with the dead, with the squares on a screen that refuse to forget us. Next Tuesday at 4:30, the calendar will ask me a question. I will answer not today. The calendar will nod and write held. The world will try again the Tuesday after that. And until the day it doesn't, I will keep my life in 7-day increments. Moving the block with 2 fingers, like pushing a boat from its mooring and letting it drift one loop further down the dock. Story 9, Caskets from Nowhere. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been warehouse operations manager at Eternal Rest Casket Company in Fresno, California for 9 years. Our warehouse isn't glamorous. It's 40,000 square feet of steel and concrete on the industrial edge of town. Semi-trucks back into loading bays, forklifts beep, and the air always smells faintly of pine sawdust and furniture polish. We don't make caskets here, we're just a distribution hub. Funeral homes across the Central Valley order caskets, urns, and burial vaults, and we fulfill those orders. Every box that passes through my hands is cataloged, barcoded, logged. Death, at least here, is orderly. At least it was. The first casket appeared on a Tuesday morning in February 2024. I got to the warehouse around 5:30 a.m. like always, unlocking the side entrance and turning off the alarm. The night shift had finished loading the last truck at midnight. The yard had been locked and quiet for hours. But when I opened the loading dock door, a casket was sitting there. It wasn't shrink-wrapped like normal deliveries. No shipping labels, no pallet jack underneath. Just a mahogany casket resting directly on the concrete, its wood gleaming under the fluorescent lights as if it had been polished minutes earlier. I thought the night crew had staged it for pickup and forgotten to label it. Then I saw the engraved brass plate inside the lid. Maria Gonzalez, rest in eternal peace. We had no order for Maria Gonzalez. No funeral home had called. The plate looked permanent, machine engraved, not a temporary tag. I checked the inventory system. Nothing, no Maria Gonzalez anywhere. Maybe a shipping mistake, I muttered. But the design itself, I'd never seen anything like it. The mahogany was hand-carved with intricate scrollwork, and the corners featured delicate inlays of mother-of-pearl. The interior wasn't the usual white crepe. It was a soft, pale blue velvet embroidered with tiny lilies. No manufacturer in our system offered this level of craftsmanship. I called the purchasing department. They combed through vendor logs, no special orders, no custom engravings. The casket didn't exist in our database. We moved it into a side bay, wrapped it in protective sheeting, and waited for someone to claim it. 3 days later, Peaceful Meadows Funeral Home called. They needed a casket for Maria Gonzalez, a beloved church matriarch who died unexpectedly of a stroke. When they saw the mahogany casket, they gasped. "This is perfect," the funeral director whispered. "Exactly what the family described." I didn't tell him it had been sitting in our warehouse before Maria died. At first, I chalked it up to a freak error, a one-time fluke, but then another one arrived. Robert Chen's casket showed up a week later. Same scenario, sitting by the dock door in the morning, no delivery paperwork, no barcode, no shrink wrap. Ornate carvings of lotus flowers along the sides. A brass plate inscribed Robert Chen, devoted father and teacher. The interior lining featured embroidered Chinese characters for longevity and peace. When Robert Chen died 4 days later, his funeral director walked straight to that casket as if drawn to it. "It's perfect," she said softly. "This looks like something his grandfather had back in Guangzhou." Our inventory system still showed no record of it. By March, it became a pattern. Dorothy Martinez's casket appeared a week early, with Spanish prayers engraved inside the lid that her family later confirmed matched her favorite Bible verse. Henry Williams's casket arrived 2 days before his fatal heart attack, featuring a subtle carving of a fishing boat along the side panel, something only his wife would have requested. No one ordered them, no one delivered them, they just appeared. We set up cameras, every dock, every hallway, every corner. I spent a Sunday afternoon reviewing footage frame by frame. At 2:17 a.m., the dock was empty. By 2:18, the casket was there. No truck, no person, just a 1-second glitch in the feed, followed by an ornate casket resting on the bay floor like it had always been there. I showed the footage to my supervisor, Dana. She frowned. "Faulty camera," she said, "or a prank," but the cameras weren't faulty. And no one could have hauled in a 300-pound mahogany casket silently in under a second. I started examining them closely. These weren't standard catalog items. They were masterpieces. Each was unique, handcrafted with impossible precision. One had marquetry panels depicting a vineyard, the wood stained in natural tones like a painting. Another featured hand-etched silver handles inscribed with Celtic knotwork. A child's casket was painted with crayon-like drawings of flowers and stick figures. Later, her brother recognized them as copies of her actual sketches from their fridge. We don't stock anything like that. These were beyond custom work. They felt personal, like someone had been studying these people's lives in secret, down to their favorite colors, hobbies, even handwriting. We started keeping the mystery caskets in Bay 6 away from customers. But one day in April, a funeral home representative wandered in by accident. He froze in front of an elaborate oak casket with a carved border of hummingbirds. "That's it," he whispered. "That's for Jennifer." Jennifer had been his wife. She wasn't dead yet. She was in hospice, clinging to life. "She loves hummingbirds," he said, tears streaming down his face. "She always said she wanted to go like one, fast and light." 2 days later, she passed. He came back and bought the casket he'd chosen before she died. Corporate started asking questions. "You're logging shipments we can't reconcile. You're selling product we don't have POs for." I tried explaining, "They're just here." From where? I had no answer. We stopped scanning the mystery caskets into the system. We started treating them like phantom inventory. If a family chose one, we marked it as a custom vendor item and moved on. But I kept a private ledger in a red notebook. Each entry detailed the date of arrival, name on the brass plate, estimated time before death, and design notes. By June, the arrivals were getting bolder. Sometimes the nameplates bore names I didn't recognize. 2 days later, a funeral home would call asking about that person. One morning, a casket arrived engraved, Emma Rodriguez, age 7. The lining was white satin embroidered with sunflowers, and the sides were etched with childlike doodles, rainbows, clouds, a smiling sun. I stared at it for hours. I wanted it to be a mistake. 5 days later, I got the call. Emma had been killed in a playground accident. Her older brother saw the casket and whispered, "Those are her drawings, that's her handwriting." I asked the delivery drivers if they'd noticed anything strange. "Nope," one said, "we only pick up what you load us." Another laughed nervously. "Miguel, we don't have time to leave random caskets lying around. We're barely on schedule as it is." I showed them photos of the carvings, the inlays. None of them had ever seen work like that. I asked our vendors if they'd manufactured these pieces. They swore they hadn't. The mystery deepened. These caskets weren't coming from any supplier on Earth I could trace. I started plotting the names on a whiteboard. Maria Gonzalez, stroke, plus 3 days. Robert Chen, heart attack, plus 4 days. Dorothy Martinez, car accident, plus 7 days. Emma Rodriguez, playground accident, plus 5 days. The lead time averaged for 7 days, like someone was anticipating death a week ahead of time. Some names stayed in Bay 6 for weeks, even months, before the call came. One sat for 92 days before the family arrived, but every single casket eventually left the warehouse for the person engraved on it. In September, I came in early and found a walnut casket at the center of Bay 6. The brass plate read, Miguel Santos, beloved brother and son. The carvings were stunning, a panoramic etching of Yosemite National Park where I'd scattered my father's ashes 2 years ago. The interior lining was dark blue, stitched with constellations. My late father taught me the names of those constellations. I sat down on the cold concrete and stared at it until my hands started to shake. I tried something reckless. I pried off the brass plate and replaced it with a blank one. I moved the casket into a different bay. 2 days later, it was back in its original spot, plate restored, my name gleaming under the lights. The warehouse cameras glitched at 3:11 a.m. that night, 32 seconds of static. A week later, a man in a charcoal suit walked into Bay 6 unannounced. He wasn't a funeral director or vendor. He didn't introduce himself. "You've been documenting them," he said calmly. I froze. "You don't need to," he added. "The orders are accurate." "Orders from who?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "We don't take credit, we just deliver." Then he turned and left. Our security camera at the front door showed no record of him entering or exiting. The caskets still appear, always perfectly timed, always perfectly suited. Families cry when they see them, but never ask where they came from. They seem to accept that their loved one was expected. I've stopped trying to hide Bay 6. Now, when a funeral home calls, I take them straight there. Most people don't question how their loved one's favorite flower ended up embroidered on a lining, or how a woodcarver somehow captured the family ranch from memory. They just nod through tears and say, "This is perfect." The red notebook is full now, over 100 names, each entry precise. I keep it in my locker, though I'm not sure why. It's not like the list would surprise anyone. Whoever's behind these deliveries already knows. I check Bay 6 every morning for another casket with my name. So far, there's just the one, still waiting. Death logistics is supposed to be sterile, emotionless. Barcodes, invoices, trucking schedules. But I've learned that someone or something is running a parallel system. One that's faster than UPS, more accurate than any forecast, and infinitely more intimate. We don't place the orders, we just handle the shipments. And I think when my time comes, the casket with Yosemite carved on its side will already be there, waiting by the loading dock, polished and perfect, as if it had been built for me years ago. Maybe it was, because around here, everything arrives before anyone dies. Story 10, The Paths of Whispering Graves. My name is Janet Murphy, and I've been head groundskeeper at Willowbrook Cemetery in Eugene, Oregon for 16 years. It's quiet work, the kind that either drives you mad with boredom or teaches you patience. 47 acres of old-growth oak trees, memorial gardens, marble angels, and polished granite markers. The cemetery was established in 1889, and some sections feel older than the town itself. People imagine cemeteries as eerie places. I've never thought so. Death is loud when it happens. Sirens, hospital machines, grieving families, but cemeteries are calm, orderly, or at least they were. It started in September 2024. I arrived early one morning, mist still hanging over the grounds, to find that 3 stepping stones in the memorial garden had moved. They weren't kicked out of place or shifted by heavy rain. They'd been rearranged. The new path curved sharply toward a shaded patch of lawn that had never been a walkway. I crouched down, studying the stones. They were heavy river rocks, each weighing 50 to 70 pounds. I would have needed a pry bar to lift them, but here they were, neatly embedded in the earth as if they'd always been there. I chalked it up to a prank, some teenagers sneaking in overnight. I made a note to review security footage later. Later that day, I followed the new path out of curiosity. It ended in a quiet corner of the memorial garden, shaded by an oak so massive it must have been a sapling when Oregon was still a territory. The ground felt strange beneath my boots, not flat like a maintained lawn, but soft, uneven. I crouched again, running my fingers through the grass. The soil felt settled, like it does over an old grave. I checked our burial maps, meticulous records dating back to the 19th century. That spot was marked as open lawn, no interments ever recorded there. But I've dug enough graves to know what the earth feels like after a coffin has been buried and left for decades. That evening, as I locked up the tool shed, a breeze swept through the cemetery. The oak trees rustled overhead, and for a moment I heard something, a faint whisper, like a voice carried on wind. It was saying a name, my coworker's name, Robert. I turned in a full circle, no one there, just empty pathways, swaying branches, and the smell of damp earth. I shook it off as fatigue. Over the next 2 weeks, more stepping stones shifted. The memorial garden's carefully planned walkways, installed back in 1995, began rearranging themselves like pieces on a chessboard. Every morning, I'd arrive to find new curves and trails that hadn't been there the day before. They all led to forgotten corners of the cemetery. And every time I followed one, I found unmarked burial sites, a circle of faint mounds under a grove of cedar trees, a depression in the earth near the fence line. Grass that grew a slightly different shade of green, betraying disturbed soil decades old. None of these graves existed in our official records. No headstones, no paperwork, no indication anyone was buried there. I started taking photos. I brought my findings to Mr. Harrison, our cemetery director. He didn't believe me at first, but when I showed him the pictures, he scheduled a survey with ground-penetrating radar. The technicians scanned the memorial garden, and sure enough, their machines lit up like fireworks. Bodies, one tech muttered, dozens of them. Some burials were shallow, some deep. Some coffins had collapsed completely, leaving only voids. The radar revealed circles of graves arranged like clock faces, all oriented towards central depressions in the soil. This isn't modern cemetery planning, the lead tech said. This looks ritualistic. After the radar survey, I started hearing more names in the wind, not every day, not at predictable times, but often enough that I began writing them down in a notebook. Robert Klein, our maintenance guy, Linda Park, a frequent visitor, her husband was buried here, Margaret Foster, an elderly woman who'd recently visited to pre-purchase a plot. David Torres, my neighbor, a contractor with 2 kids. The names didn't belong to the dead, they belonged to the living. 2 days after I wrote Margaret Foster in my notebook, she died in a car accident on I-5. I learned about it from the obituary in the Register Guard. That same evening, a windstorm swept through the cemetery. I stood by the shed, chilled to the bone, listening to dozens of whispers layered over one another like dry leaves skittering on pavement. I couldn't make out all the names, but I recognized some. I told the staff what was happening. Most laughed it off. Some avoided eye contact. Robert, whose name I'd heard first, went pale and left the room. A few days later, he called out sick. He'd been admitted to the hospital with a sudden aneurysm. He never came back to work. Mr. Harrison was practical. It's a liability issue, he said. We'll document the findings and rope off those areas. No need to alarm visitors. We put up discreet fencing, claiming it was for erosion control, but the paths ignored us. Every morning, more stones shifted, carving new trails around the barriers. Families began following the new routes instinctively, as if drawn to them. Some left flowers on empty patches of lawn. Unaware they were honoring forgotten graves. I spent nights combing through city archives. Willowbrook Cemetery had been in continuous operation since 1889, but I found references to an even older burial ground on this property, dating back to the 1850s. There were whispers in historical accounts about pauper burials, unmarked plots, even rumors of indigenous remains relocated without ceremony. Some graves, I realized, had been paved over or landscaped into oblivion long before meticulous record-keeping began. The earth hadn't forgotten. One evening in October, I stayed late. The sun set early, casting the cemetery in deep shadow. I grabbed a flashlight and followed one of the newly formed paths. It led me back to the oak tree where I'd first felt something was wrong. The air was still, but the whispers came anyway, soft and steady. David Torres. I shined my light on the ground. The grass moved as if something beneath it was breathing. The next morning, I visited David Torres at his house. He laughed when I told him. "You're joking, right? A cemetery told you my name." "Please," I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. "Just be careful, stay home, don't take any risks this week." 2 days later, an ambulance screamed down our street. David had collapsed at his daughter's baseball practice. Heart attack, dead before they got him to the hospital. The whispers grew louder after David's death. No longer single names, but choruses, dozens of voices speaking at once, their tones soft but insistent. When the wind blew hard, it was overwhelming, a tidal wave of syllables riding the air. Sometimes I'd catch my own name. I started photographing the paths each morning, then overlaying the images. The stepping stones weren't random, they were forming shapes. Spirals, circles, networks of lines connecting the oldest graves to the unmarked ones. The paths seemed to reorganize themselves nightly, as if drawing a map too large for me to see. I begged Mr. Harrison to shut down the cemetery temporarily. "Janet, you're tired," he said gently. "You're letting this place get to you. People are dying," I snapped. "I hear their names before it happens." He sighed. "Do you know what that would do to this business if you're wrong? Cemeteries rely on trust, Janet. People need to feel safe here." He gave me 2 weeks off. I couldn't stay away. On my 4th night of vacation, I drove back. The gates were locked, but I had keys. The cemetery was alive with movement. The moon illuminated hundreds of rearranged stones, forming a spiral that led to the center of the memorial garden. At its heart, I found a mass grave, a wide depression in the earth, ringed by a dozen unmarked headstones half buried in soil. The whispers here were deafening, my name over and over, mixed with voices I didn't recognize. "Janet, Janet Murphy." I stumbled back, tripping over a loose stone. I don't know what Willowbrook Cemetery is trying to do. Is it warning us, or is it choosing us? The whispers aren't mournful, they're expectant, like names being read from a roll call. And the paths aren't random, they're guiding people. Families follow them unconsciously, pausing to lay flowers on patches of grass where future graves will be. Some visitors have told me I felt like something was waiting for me there. In late October, a violent windstorm ripped through Eugene. I drove to Willowbrook the next morning and nearly wept at the sight. Every stepping stone in the cemetery had shifted. The walkways no longer resembled the neat landscaping design from 1995. They'd formed hundreds of spirals radiating outward from the central oak like a fingerprint pressed into the land. And the whispers, God, the whispers were constant, no longer tied to wind, just present. I've stopped trying to fix the paths. Every time I reset them, they move back overnight. The cemetery is arranging itself according to its own design. Families seem to accept the changes instinctively. It feels more natural, one visitor said as she wandered a newly formed path. They don't hear the whispers, or maybe they do and they mistake them for memory. This morning, I walked to the oak tree at the center of the spirals. The ground beneath it felt soft again, like a grave waiting to settle. The voices were louder than ever, my name over and over. Janet, Janet Murphy. I looked down. Someone or something had etched my name into a flat river stone set neatly at the end of the path. It wasn't vandalism, it was placement. I don't think Willowbrook Cemetery is haunted in the way people mean. I think it's alive. The ground remembers every body laid in it. It knows the weight of grief, the names of the soon-to-be mourned. It rearranges itself not out of malice, but preparation. Some paths, I've realized, aren't leading to where people are. They're leading to where people will be. I keep hearing my name. I've stopped resisting it. Tonight, I'm going back to the oak tree. I'll bring flowers, maybe a chair, and I'll sit in the center of the spiral until the voices quiet. Maybe the ground will take me gently, the way it took the others. And maybe, long after I'm gone, a visitor will follow a new path to my unmarked grave, drawn by whispers they can't explain. We like to think cemeteries are for the dead. They're not. They're for the living. The stones are for us, the neat rows, the straight paths, a way to impose order on something ancient and inevitable. But Willowbrook has its own order. It doesn't need maps or paperwork. It remembers everyone. It calls for the next ones. And tonight, I think it's calling for me.